Hello, everyone. I am Tal Bachman, and I am thrilled to be here today on behalf of American Greatness to chat with Dr. Naomi Wolf. What can I say that hasn't been said so often? Doctor of English Language and Literature from Oxford, best-selling author, time after time. How do you do that?
It's not a real question, I'm sure.
Well, no, it is. I'm really impressed. So I want to get right into it. You've had an amazing career as a public intellectual. You've written all sorts of pieces. I've been kind of keeping an eye on you my whole adult life. As I mentioned in my email, I guess my intuitions were sort of a little different than yours. But this latest piece that you wrote just, really hit me hard. I just found it really moving, so wise, so insightful. And it's called, if you haven't heard about this piece, it's called, "Is It Time for Intellectuals to Talk About God?" And people can read that, I guess, on your Substack. Is that the best place?
That's right. Yeah.
So,
and Daily Cloud. Mm-hmm.
well, your essay begins with you recalling time spent at a medical freedom, I guess, with medical freedom advocates in the Hudson River Valley. And you say that experience reminded you of what it's like to live in a sane community, which kind of implies that everyone else. Yeah, there's been a lot of insanity, or people have kind of been manipulated into something that they've never been. So
Yeah.
I guess to begin with, I wonder if you can elaborate on that experience.
Sure. Yes. Well, as we all know, you're in Canada, right? Currently.
At the
Yeah.
moment, I am in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah. So Canada, Australia, the United States, Britain, France, Italy, we all know what we've all been through in 2020 to 2021, and that we were locked in our homes and told to, live in a state of catatonic like fear. And a lot of the data around that are unraveling now. I don't need to go into detail now, but the point is, in November of 2020, we'd been locked in like everyone else for must have been 6 or 7 months. And I was watching, I've studied isolation when I've studied torture. People who want people to lose their minds, put them in solitary confinement or isolate them from their loved ones or from society. And that causes permanent psychological damage. Psychiatric damage. It harms the brain to isolate people. And I also know from my uncle's work, he's a well-known psychologist, Dan Goleman, he's talked a lot about how when the amygdala is activated, which is the reptile brain, you can't be logical. And so meditation, for instance, is one way to kind of calm that reptile brain that's fight or flight, heart racing, threats everywhere, and kind of let the mind not live in that perpetual reactivity, which tends to see danger everywhere. That's how we survived in when there were, saber-toothed tigers among us or around us. So I was watching the effects of this isolation and this fear on all the people I love. We were living in the middle of the woods where I am now in the Hudson Valley. And I, also knew from my study of closing societies how dangerous this state of histrionic propaganda, which I could tell was histrionic propaganda already, was, and how dangerous isolation was. And so I think I kind of, I wanted to go worship in my synagogue in the Hudson Valley. I joined this new synagogue, and it's like, I read the studies. It was a risk I was willing to take, sitting outside or, with windows open, or, making my own decisions about that level of risk, which is what we used to do as adults in a free society, and what we used to do for our children in free societies. We would decide our own level of risk. So I invited people who wanted to, Zoom in together to worship to my house. And I got this kind of hostile reaction, not just from the community, but from the rabbi, we're not going to convene. And I'm like, you won't sit outside. We can't have Shabbat, in the parking lot, 12 feet away from each other. We can't worship as a community, those of us who want to, sitting on folding chairs in the parking lot outside the shul. I'd never met the people in that synagogue, since I joined, because it had been closed. And they're like, no, can't do it. We've got an epidemiologist on our staff, on our board, which is something that, I'm writing about this now, has happened a lot. And they're saying, no, we can't. And I was just so horrified, and I said, you know what, if I were a rabbi and someone said, I want to worship, I would meet them in a parking lot. I would meet them by train tracks. I would meet them in a bus shelter. I would meet someone who wants to worship wherever they are, if I were a rabbi. So that was sad. And so I think I put out on Twitter, like, I don't care what religion, please, invite me to join you, because this is nonsense. So I was contacted by someone I'd actually gone to college with, and she was part of this medical community in the Hudson Valley. Sorry for the long preamble. Bottom line, I went to this kind of underground community where people had been meeting and gathering and dancing and sharing food and having a wonderful community life throughout the pandemic. Just like a relative of mine who's an Orthodox Jew in New Jersey, they had also been gathering, worshiping, dancing, having weddings, bar mitzvahs, bas mitzvahs throughout the pandemic. Those who wanted to stay home and Zoom in could do so, like sane people. And, the Amish, many, many communities that hadn't been studied had continued to gather. And so I started hanging out with them, and I was astonished to see that, they were perfectly well. This was when the propaganda in the media was like, literally, if you're around another human being, you'll drop dead, you'll be rushed to the ICU. And they hadn't lost anyone to COVID. And they were doing things like being outside, gardening, exercising, getting sunlight, all the things we used to understand, raise your immunities, but also that they weren't insane. And as they continued to gather and I joined them, I was watching people I knew and loved become more and more detached from reality, more and more vulnerable to propaganda and really mind control, to the point where, the people who are exploiting them had them exactly where they wanted them. They were railroaded into lining up to accept this experimental, injection, which is their decision, right? But they got to the point where, journalists, editors, psychologists, educated people trained in critical thinking were saying to me, don't show me any information contrary to what CNBC is telling me. So we lost, we lost communities. We lost critical thinking. We lost the Western tradition. We lost worship. We lost, many other things that I can talk about. But I guess when I was asked more recently to speak to that gathering of medical freedom activists, I realized, it's just, there's no point in not being honest. I'd come to believe that, for me personally, right, I'm not proselytizing, that the nature of the evil we were up against was more than human, bad actors, that, it was kind of magisterial and complex and elegant and kind of beyond human capacities. It had erected a two-tier discrimination society in 18 months. It had ruined family connections, destroyed children's lives, stripped assets from millions of small businesses and immigrants and, communities of color. And everyone who had been right on in my world of the right on left was okay with that. And so I just, like, looking at all the evil that surrounded me, I just kind of confessed that, I'd started to pray again, because I couldn't see a way out of it that didn't involve the help of God. And also because the evil was so, like, almost beautifully constructed, so kind of extraordinarily global and coordinated, that I felt like almost a negative proof. Like, if evil could orchestrate itself with that level of complexity, it must be aimed at something really good. There must be a God that all of this is mobilizing against.
I totally get that. Basically what you're making is kind of an intelligent design argument. The evil
I,
is so, well, you might not put it that way, but
mhm,
I'm not trying to stump for intelligent design here, but there's a level of complexity and a kind of perverse grandeur is what I'm
right.
hearing you say. Um, that, you just think like, how could humans getting together, even the most brilliant humans, put something like this together?
Right.
And I ask myself, what is actually more unnerving, that it is some sort of cosmic, I mean, I don't have any particular religious beliefs, I'll just disclose that right now.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of curious. I guess I would say I'm on as much of a journey as maybe you are, but um so I don't really know what happens out there. But I wondered to myself, what is more unnerving, that there is some sort of cosmic, otherworldly, malevolent intelligence driving this, or that there's not?
Mhm.
Because if there's
Yeah,
not, yeah, I mean, that's even more
we're really in
terrifying. We're
trouble.
like trapped on a
Right.
floating rock
Right.
and like our
We're
hopes are dead.
psychopaths.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, can I ask, I mean, so in your article, you said that you started to pray again. And I just wonder if you could share, what does that look like? Is it just you alone? Are you in a group setting? Are you singing hymns? Like,
I mean, these are such difficult things to talk about for me because, I come from the kind of thoroughly, I've had a very privileged education, and I'm from the left, and it's literally more embarrassing to talk about a spiritual life coming from the world I come from, in public than, to talk about like a drug addiction or recovery or, a gambling addiction. Um, I mean, not that I know personally, but that, it's like it's easier to talk about anything, I imagine, than this on the, coming from the left. But that I'm out, so I might as well just answer your question because it's a fair question. Well, here's where I really want to be, very kind of gentle and confessional. People say and do horrible things in the name of religion and stupid things in the name of religion. And I'm Jewish, right? And so my own people have had horrible things done to us in God's name, for millennia. So I really want to kind of wreath what I'm about to share with caveats and say, this is just me. I'm not telling anyone else to do it. I have no knowledge. I don't know who I'm praying to. You know, I'm not, I don't believe in religion particularly. All of them are flawed and human constructs. So this, I just want to like really stress what I don't like about people who talk about God very often is that they arrogate to that a kind of authority. I come at it from the opposite direction. I am completely humbled by the situation we're finding ourselves in. Nothing that I thought gave me power gives me any power, or
mm,
any of us in this
mm,
situation. We have
mm,
to throw away,
yeah,
every assumption that our
yeah,
privilege would protect us, that our education would protect us, that our
yeah,
being Western would protect us.
yeah,
It's gone. That
yeah,
world is gone.
yeah, or some feature, some clause in a law, or some passage in the Constitution. I mean, for
Right.
decades, it's been, well, that could never happen because the Constitution or this law or that law. And it's like, okay, now you're like, well, these are words on a piece of paper.
Exactly.
They mean whatever
Exactly.
the guy who's commands the firearms. They mean whatever they say they mean, or they don't mean anything at all, just like that. But anyway, I
Right.
didn't mean
No,
to interrupt
exactly.
you.
I mean, it's all the structures. I mean, I think people are fools right now to believe that the structures we were assured would protect us are going to protect us. I mean, nothing's going to protect us but our own actions, and maybe, help from elsewhere, at this point. I mean, Canada is even worse off than the United States, but literally every day in the United States, we're fighting the fight on a political plane to protect people's freedoms through passing laws. Daily Clout does that. So literally every day I get emails saying, just now, Illinois is going to pass a law giving the public health authorities the power to detain people indefinitely if they've been exposed to a contagious disease. And
Yeah,
we just defeated a similar regulation proposed for Washington state. And New York state is trying to roll this out. And, you guys have your own appalling draconian crackdowns that disregard, Canadian law and the Charter of
yeah,
Rights.
yeah,
So we're literally on the precipice, and in some states and some countries have gone over the precipice. So having said that, I guess just going back to the faith thing,
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I don't think people should keep fighting, and I think people should do whatever they feel called to do. So I'm just saying, I personally, I literally have been fighting this fight for 18 months, and I wake up and I look at the world, this tyrannical regime that has manifested in 18 months. And I think, well, literally, I could summon all of my resources, all of my voice, all the mobilization of patriots. And I'm doing that. I have a lot of people who are, fighting hard to protect liberty. But ultimately, this thing is bigger than anything I can imagine overcoming with the tools at our disposal. So, God help us. Like, it's literally as simple as that. Like, God, please help. I mean, Annie Lamott, I believe, said there's kind of 3 basic prayers, and one of them is help.
Yeah.
And I don't have anything fancy except, and it's not any particular religion or deity. I can barely even visualize, who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's like when you have a baby, you don't know who that being is, but you have a relationship with the baby, even before the baby's born. I seem to have a relationship, and the more I talk, to whoever it is or whatever it is, which I can't even conceptualize, the more I feel in relationship, which I know, Jews do believe that if you kind of address a higher power, you'll manifest a relationship. But I don't understand what's happening. I don't know what it is. I just feel moved to be in dialogue and ask for help. And for whatever reason, and I'm not telling anyone else to do this, but for whatever reason, I kind of felt like, I might as well talk about this publicly, because, I just felt compelled to.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll help anyone else. I don't know if there was a utility in going public with it, but I've always been honest with my readers. And, if we've reached the point of, I've come to the end of the line of, I've been telling readers since the end of America where we're at in this march to tyranny. And we passed step 10, and now we're at, God help us. That's where we are.
Do you pray sort of out loud, or is this in your heart, or is it a
No,
group?
I don't pray out loud. I'm not there yet. I mean, if I could worship somewhere, if if the synagogue up the road didn't keep unvaccinated people from entering the building, and if the Catholic Church up the road didn't seat vaccinated people in a different setting than unvaccinated people, and force unvaccinated people to wear masks and not touch anyone, I would be worshiping and using whatever words that tradition, offered. I don't care. Like, and I don't think God cares, honestly. I don't think God cares personally.
Yeah. I mean,
what language people use.
Yeah. I mean, whoever the manipulators are, they've done a bang up job on people that, I mean, in former times, were risking their lives to have worship services, and by the way, are still doing that in certain parts of the world. I mean, if you're in, right, you're in some, if you're in China or whatever, you're part of an underground Christian network, prayer groups or whatever, and these guys will bust in and drag you away if you have like your, I mean, and that kind of happened here almost overnight, except it was kind of more perverse because they got the leaders. So I don't know if it's like the Dr. Goldman amygdala thing, which I didn't actually know he was your uncle. I've been reading him forever. I mean, actually, it was one of Daniel Goleman's books that really helped me at a difficult time of my life many years ago when I was kind of coming out of the religion that I was born into. But anyway, that's a different chat. Yeah, these people just seem to cave, and you wonder, I mean, at the same time, I have kind of a sense, as you do, of how that manipulation occurred, and yet it just, like, the effects have been so extreme. You can't reason with people. Like in your essay, you talk about, and as you just mentioned, you talk about people that you've tried to get through to, and they just shut down. They don't want to hear it. I had a friend to me say, when I was trying to be delicate, because this lady was absolutely terrified, like living in terror, just believing everything that she watched on MSNBC. You know, if Rachel Maddow says it, it's like God himself has,
Right.
or her. I mean, that's it. It's the
Exactly.
beginning and the end of the story. And we won't
Exactly.
even go into her track record of accuracy. But so I tried to sort of delicately relieve her anxieties, really. And she stopped me and said, I can't hear this. Please let me live with my illusions.
Wow.
She actually said that, because
Wow.
the moment she started to sense that I actually was telling her something that was true, it just, and it was, and I just, so I stopped. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to you. I've had those conversations with people I love so many times, and I know that other people's families are being torn apart, with exactly this discourse. And honestly, Rachel Maddow and MSNBC and CNN have a lot to answer for in if there's a final reckoning karmically, because it's lies upon lies upon
Yeah,
lies, and our, any older lady of a certain background does see Rachel Maddow as,
yeah,
descended from,
yeah.
I
It's
don't know where
Moses.
she gets
It's
all of
Moses
exactly,
coming.
but it's
I
like,
know it. And
it,
I mean, so you've been banned from social media. Your former friends have, as you
mm,
mentioned in this great essay of yours, I mean, your former friends have rallied together to crush you, to smear you, to defame you. I mean, like last night I was reading through some of these articles that these folks, who I assume you have to have known for years, are writing. I mean, it's just the most brutal, and I have to say unfair, just every unfair slam. I mean, I'm not saying that there's, I mean, if you have a career, you're writing things in public, there's probably a few pieces you want back. I mean, I just started doing that. And even I'm kind of, but I mean, that's just, that goes without saying. But these people have been so brutal. Um, and, and they've banned you for promoting misinformation.
mm,
Who has promoted more misinformation than Rachel and all of
yeah,
her pals? And as you point out in your article, now these people are printing articles basically acknowledging that what you were saying a year ago was true.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's beyond belief. I'm so proud of the reporting I did that got me deplatformed again and again, and then finally permanently. Um, each time I was right. When I was suspended from Twitter, the the kind of weirdly global smear campaign, again, very coordinated seeming, came after I had posted Ralph Barrick's CV, Dr. Ralph Barrick's CV from the University of North Carolina, that conclusively proved that he had received millions of dollars in funding from Dr. Fauci and the NIH for gain of function research. And that was precisely something that Dr. Fauci had been denying in
Right.
May in our Congress. So I was literally deplatformed 24 hours after posting that. And I was suspended initially because I'd been listening to women reporting on social media, eyewitness accounts that their menses were disrupted in horrible, horrible ways, and that things were happening with women's bodies that should not happen. Like
Mhm.
menopausal women were bleeding, and women were having 2 periods a month, and little girls were, having horrible hemorrhage, like horrible. Like if you know anything about women's health, which I thought my team cared about, you don't have to be a rocket science to know that something's really wrong. And I reported that, and I was called batshit crazy and counterfactual by a
Yeah.
number of prominent kind of
Yeah.
men, one of them a CNN commentator. And sure enough, a year later, after so many women have been injured with this very symptom, the New York Times, the NIH are like, oh, well, it seems that it disrupts your menstrual cycle. So, over and over again, I was over the target and was viciously smeared and deplatformed. And, I don't know what to say about that, except that honestly, I do think having a spiritual life at this point is useful, because if I cared more about not being called names by CNN, if I'd never believed I would have to meet my maker someday, I don't think I could have, kept reporting and kept screaming, here's the evidence. This is what really happened. Here's Dr. Barrick's CV. Here are women saying they're suffering. Here's this peer-reviewed paper about the spike protein. Like, I had to, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know what to say. It's kind of beautiful in retrospect that my life stripped me of everything that could have kept me tempted to collude with lies. I have nothing, everything that has led a lot of my friends and colleagues to keep lying, or keep taking Gates money to lie and put people in danger and besmirch the name of journalism. That option was stripped from me, and I wouldn't have, I hope, taken it anyway. So it's freed me to keep telling the truth, but it's painful to watch so many lies propagated. Like, Satan is called the Prince of Lies, right? And
Right.
I don't think, being Jewish, I don't think I believe in Satan, but I certainly believe in evil. And to turn on MSNBC or CNN, or even read the New York Times and see just straight up lies, or manipulating people with exploiting their innumeracy or exploiting their lack of knowledge about how data functions in a dashboard, it's incredibly painful, and it's a crime. It's a criminal act, and it's happening on such a global scale. It's quite overwhelming to witness. I don't regret anything I did or said, though. I hope, someday the truth will be as easy to find on Google as all the lies, about me personally. But, that's the cost of having told the truth.
You would think, just getting back to the women's health thing, you would think that any hint that this a rushed to market injection might be affecting women's health would be a front page story, that it would raise alarm bells, right? I mean, fertility is something you don't really want to mess around with. So early on in this thing, this is, a year and a half ago or something, there was one article that came out about menstrual dysregulation following the injections. And, I looked for follow-up articles. The only follow-up articles to that article, which had come out in kind of a major organ, were trivializations and sort of quasi denials. And, well, this is just a temporary thing. This is anecdotal. It was like a coordinated spin job. Now, in my own circle, my son's girlfriend, most of her girlfriends have had problems with their periods after this. Now, whether you still want to get it or not, different question. I mean, that's up to the individual, but that is something that you really would want to know about.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Or even just the simple fact, which is now confirmed, that you're going to bleed on average, according to the study they finally did, 12 extra days a year. Like, even if nothing else bad happens, that's a big commitment. That's a big, cost benefit analysis for young women, especially, who are not at serious risk of this disease. But go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt.
I agree. I mean, I'm no expert on women's health, but, when I read a piece saying that, there's all of these postmenopausal women that have started bleeding again. I mean, I'm like, what? I mean, this is something is going on here. And yet, unlike all of these actors that you've named and who are trying to crush you, have just evinced zero interest in this. So I know we got to kind of wrap up here in a few, but I just wanted to ask you quickly one thing. One thing you mentioned is like the civil rights organizations, women's organizations, NARAL, ACLU. These people have been oddly silent. Like, I've never, like I've had my qualms with the ACLU over the years, but you would think like, okay, this is all happening, all this crazy stuff. I mean, if there were ever a time to kind of join up with the ACLU and fight, because these circumstances have kind of brought people, as you know, I mean, you've kind of been on an ecumenical path even before this all happened. Circumstances changed, and all of a sudden, people that you kind of thought of as your rivals, your philosophical rivals, you now see as allies. And in fact, you are allies. I mean, I went to a protest, and it was half back to the landers with drum circles and patchouli and smoking pot, and the other half was like Toby Keith playing rednecks, flying flags with gigantic pickup trucks, and
Right.
everyone was friends and
Yeah.
allies.
I know
But
what you mean.
yeah, and you're like, okay, great, here we are, and this is a monstrosity. Now the angles are a little different, like the kind of the righties were kind of flying flags, and it's about law and constitutions, and the lefties were kind of more about personal autonomy and my body, my choice. So anyway, what I wanted to ask you is, where did these organizations go? And I looked in vain for any argument from these people as to why they were sitting this one out. Maybe they said something and I don't know it, but like, what is the ACLU argument? What is the NARAL argument for just completely abandoning my body, my choice?
Ugh. I mean, what's so shameful is that the hypocrisy is so deep that, or the cognitive dissonance, or both, are so deep that I haven't seen that they feel the need to supply an argument.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, in my essay, it may have been that one or one of the others, I mentioned that Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan both were adamant about privacy and a woman's medical decisions are between herself and her doctor when it came to abortion rights. And then 4 weeks later, they were reversing course on mandates of this experimental injection for people who are just trying to feed their families. So in that kind of turnaround of two highly, women who know very well what the Constitution says and what the Fourth Amendment says and what Griswold says, which is the basis for Roe v. Wade, which I'm surprised no lawyers are using as a basis for rejecting any questions about vaccines or medical status at all, because abortion rights were decided on a privacy basis in Griswold versus Connecticut. They just did a volte-face and didn't justify themselves in the least. And no one
Yeah.
pointed it out. Like, no one
Yeah.
in the mainstream media is saying, hey, wait a minute, we've fought for abortion rights for 40 years under this philosophical banner that you get to decide what goes into your body or what you do with your body. And now, all of that is gone. Like, no one's raising it. And that's one of the reasons I feel like, my people, this tribe of the left, has almost been possessed
Yeah.
by another entity, because they are not accountable. They're not reasoning. It's a kind of, I'm reading a book about mass hysteria. Oh, sorry. I'm reading a book about mass hysteria and the nature of crowds. And I'm reading a book about combating cult mind control, because if you're not seeing the contradiction there, you're no longer, in a reasonable space. So,
you are
but on a happier note, sorry, I just want to say, I too am seeing the alliances that you're seeing. Sorry, let me do that again. I too am seeing the alliances that you're seeing, new alliances between people who thought they were adversaries. Hippie, crunchy, organic farmers. I mean, the medical freedom community, the protests that I go to, in support of our first responders in New York, having the right to decide what their personal choices are. The people in those gatherings I don't know what their politics are. I don't know who they voted for. And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
We used to be Americans, and we all believed in the right of people to certain things. And it was not about labels. And I hope one silver lining, if there is one, of this horrible time, is that we build those alliances, and stop asking stupid questions. We have civil discussion about what we don't agree on, but join forces in defense of our rights.
Yeah, well said. Well, on that note, maybe we should wrap up. Thanks for chatting with me. I mean, I'm not much of a praying man, but I am praying that this ends soon, because this is just nuts. And I mean, I have to agree with you that, there's just something deeply sinister. It's just, it was an inconvenience for the first week, and then it turned into something kind of genuinely evil. And, we could talk for hours about that. So I pray, I hope that this ends soon, and that people come back to their senses and leave it's just a cult mindset, and it's tough to be around. But anyway, so
inshallah. or as my grandmothers would say, from your mouth to God's ears. So I hope so too. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
talking to
much.
me.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.